Ladies and gentlemen, my name's Paul. Hopefully you're having an amazing day. It's happening. Nvidia are releasing a super series of cards, aka a refresh of Ampere. And this is internally being known apparently as Phase 2 Ampere. So obviously Phase 1 would be GPUs such as the 3070, 3080, and even the 3070 Ti and RTX 3080 Ti. So yeah, the TIs are actually part of Phase 1, and there are a couple of other SKUs which are apparently part of Phase 1, which is the 3050 Ti, for example. But Phase 2 is going to be the Super series, and we already heard Kopity7 Kimmy discuss this quite a lot recently, with GA103 being the lead core for this, new charge. Now, at the moment, there doesn't seem to be a ton of details of what Nvidia are actually planning here. Personally, I'm hearing whispers of a rather different memory configuration. The thing is though, Nvidia changes this stuff sometimes on a dime. Do you remember the whole 3080 Ti fiasco where it was like 12 gigabyte, then it was 20 gigabyte, then it was 12 gigabyte, then it was 20 gigabyte again. And the core count was going up and down like that. I mean, seriously, the engineers, they must have felt dizzy with Jensen changing it every 5 seconds. And this is natural. However, what's really interesting is that the production of these cards allegedly is going to begin this quarter. And so obviously it does take a while for availability, once a product is actually, being produced. So most likely we're going to start to see these GPUs, really start being tested or leaked benchmarks over the next couple of months, I assume, especially when AIB start to get their grubby little mitts on them. And the really interesting thing is that there's a ton of hints online that one of the big differences is that Nvidia are going ham with the power consumption here. Now, Kopity7 Kimmy recently stated that it's kind of like a step in the direction of LoveLace, but they didn't really give any indication as to what this means. But very recently, Grayman has been tweeting, and again, quite well-known leaker, that LoveLace is very power hungry. And, he kind of gave fire indicators to show what the differences are between RDNA3 and, again, LoveLace. And yeah, RDNA3, apparently in the higher end SKUs, I'm hearing the same thing. It's not going to be super, super duper low power consumption. And, just thinking about it logically, and again, I do not have block diagrams for Nave 31 or 32 yet, but just thinking about it logically, we can probably expect stacked dies, and they're going to have to be very careful in the configuration of those dies, just obviously to be able to extract heat the best they can. And I'll be very interested to see what AMD's cooling solution is for the, dual GCD configuration. I mean, yes, they're on 5nm, but, technically 5nm for the GCD, and the MCD is going to be on 6nm, as I was discussing yesterday. But even so, that's an awful lot of heat to dissipate. A very small area. It's going to be very interesting. I wonder if we're going to see a very different type of cooling configuration from AMD going forward. But getting back to Nvidia and the RTX 40 series, rather interestingly, there's also been another tweet as well, which has been further providing details and clarification as to what Grayman was referring to with the doubling of performance for the RTX 3090 when it comes to LoveLace. He basically says that obviously with the 5nm process they can crank the frequencies much higher, but again, it will be traditional rasterization performance that he is referring to here, so not necessarily ray tracing, although we can imagine this to be the case as well. Yeah, these next generation cards are going to be very interesting. I don't know. I'm really excited to see what the next gen has to offer, but there is a lot of debate. I've been admittedly a little bit trolling and kind of joking around on Twitter about power consumption doesn't really mean anything in GPUs. Just give me all the performance. But being serious, there is a really interesting debate of how much extra power is worth what performance. And you've got to imagine, if you're Nvidia or you're AMD and you're kind of like, what can I get away with? Would it be better for me to get, let's say, 90 frames a second in this game, but have a, GPU core temperature hover in the mid 70s and X amount of power consumption, Or is it better for fans to go brr and just ignore things like power limits and people's bills, but get, 100, 110 frames a second? And, let's just take complicated stuff out like ray tracing and other things for this video. There is like that really interesting thing. And, when you're looking at things from a buyer's perspective, and PR companies are very aware of this, it's like, let's say you have two cards. It really doesn't matter what they are. I'll just call them A and B. And let's say A gets 59 frames a second and B gets 57 frames a second or 58 frames a second. All you're seeing is that one card is higher than the other in the stack. When you're looking at the benchmarks, it could be like 0.1 frame a second. And all people's brains do a lot of the time is they just go, what? Okay, it's higher, it's higher, it's higher, it's higher, especially if you're skim reading. So yeah, I think this is one of the reasons that power limits are kind of being ignored, and there is a whole discussion on regarding that, which is kind of outside the remit of this video because we've got so much other stuff to talk about. And perhaps one of the more interesting things actually is Valve, because they have actually decided to release their own portable device. And this thing, well, it's actually rather interesting, as developers have been weighing in and saying that pound for pound, or actually pixel for pixel, the GPU is extremely capable, as the resolution it's outputting on its 7-inch screen is obviously much lower than what the Xbox Series X is for like a 4K. So pixel for pixel, this thing actually is more powerful than a Series X GPU. Now again, that's because of the much lower resolution. But yeah, it's RDNA 2 based, so it can still do things like hardware-based ray tracing, it can still do VRS and mesh shaders, whatever. Although let's just be honest, you're probably not going to be running ray tracing on this type of GPU, but I guess maybe proportionally it could be an interesting option. As for the CPU, it's Zen 2 based in architecture, 4 cores, 8 threads, either 2.4 to 3.5 gigahertz, depending on what's going on with the workload. I'm going to be very interested to see how gamers actually receive this product and how popular it actually is. Because the thing is, like the new Switch, the OLED model, people are criticizing it because, they've worked out the production costs, and the rumor is that while Nintendo had cranked the, price up of the product by like $50, the actual production cost is only $10 more. So, Nintendo are being a bit cheeky there. However, the thing about, the two consoles, if you call them that, is that they are designed to serve kind of different markets. And the benefit, obviously, Nintendo has is just their IPs. Like, that really is the strength of Nintendo. So I think that, in a way, they are in competition with one another, but they're also not. Let me know if you're a PC gamer or just kind of interested in this and how you're going to, kind of view Steam's new toy. My big problem with Steam, getting into this kind of market, they sometimes do projects and then they don't really see them through. Remember Steam OS or, Steam machines? And, Gabe seems to be kind of behind it. He's pushing it a bit, so maybe that's a good sign. But, yeah, I've got this, like, I really do love Steam. Sorry, Valve, not Steam. I really do love Valve as a company. And they were an incredibly important part of my journey, when I was, like, really getting into PC gaming, like Half-Life 1 and the Voodoo 2 were, yeah, they were just such an important part of my life. And I remember, like, when I was buying new graphics cards at the time and I was just throwing them into machines just to see what I could get out of Half-Life 2. But damn, like, they're such a weird company at times. Yeah, it's an interesting product. Right guys, final story. Intel may be purchasing Global Foundries for an eye-watering $30 billion US. And this acquisition is incredibly important for a plethora of reasons. Now, we all know the global shortages that have been affecting, well, just about everything. From the chips that go into cars, to cell phones, to obviously graphics cards. Yeah, just the whole world has really been experiencing shortages right now. But furthermore, Intel itself is changing a lot as a company. Yes, they are of course still going to be producing their own CPUs, they're getting into GPUs and so on and so on. And Intel do have a very impressive portfolio of products. They've had problems, naturally, but they are a very interesting company because while they are technically starting to outsource to TSMC for some products, and yeah, there's a lot of debate exactly how many products are going to be outsourced to TSMC, arguably speaking, Intel do have a major string in its bow because they can produce their own hardware, which is obviously something that AMD and Nvidia and so on just do not have that ability. They're essentially a fabless company. So this is actually, you know, a major discussion point and way outside the topic of this video of just how much of an influence TSMC actually has on the market, because essentially speaking, yeah, Lisa Su and Papa Jensen are, of course, you know, very smart individuals, Nvidia, AMD, they've done stellar work designing the architectures and stuff, and there are definitely benefits of being fabless, but you're still pretty much at the mercy of whatever capacity TSMC have left to allocate you, just making things as simple as possible. And the really big irony, of course, is that AMD did not used to be fabless. In fact, they span off Global Foundries, Glo Flo, back in the day, as well as other things like, remember when they were producing chips for cell phones? And I guess in some ways things have kind of gone full circle and just gotten really complicated. I actually know some AMD employees from back in the day who were really unhappy that, you know, let's just say they weren't happy about the spinning off of Global Foundries, but it was kind of a good decision in some ways. But anyway, bottom line. So Global Foundries is often thought of as being vastly inferior to TSMC in its capacity to produce products, i.e. TSMC's processors are much more advanced. And yeah, you know, if you look at it in terms of raw numbers, this is true. But first of all, there's a very interesting thing of just, first of all, even how much money TSMC is making with their bigger chips like 90nm. Like, you know, there's a very good kind of graph here that I'll throw up on screen. You can see just how much money TSMC are even making on what many would think of as like nodes which no one would ever use. But of course, a lot of these legacy products are still being created. Secondly, it's not just a simple case of looking at the size of a manufacturing process, or rather node, and then just using that as a way to kind of gauge how advanced the specific process is. And Dylan Patel actually did a really good write-up on semi-analysis. I'll link it in the video description as he goes through things rather painstakingly. And I don't really want to use up a ton of video time to kind of explain the differences between the nodes. I've gone over it a couple of times before, so let's not, you know, use up a ton of time on that. But the bottom line is, for Intel, and this is what I really want to focus on, it's an incredibly interesting purchase. And it really does put them in the position of being a major player in chip production, especially if they continue to ramp huge amounts of money into research and development and change Global Foundries' kind of internal policies to push them to develop even more advanced processors. Honestly, I don't think anyone, any analyst, can really predict what this would do to the industry going forward. And I do think in some ways we do need a really big competitor to TSMC. Yes, Samsung are, you know, there, but we're recently hearing that on their leading edge processors, like the defect rate is like 50% or something like that, which is obviously not exactly the best. So we've been hearing a lot, of course, of Intel wanting to branch out and have TSMC help produce its chips, but Intel themselves have also been rather vocal that it wants to also help others produce chips. And this makes an awful lot of sense when you start to consider some of Intel's decisions over the past couple of years, especially over the past 12 months. With Intel purchasing Global Foundries, it would have a profound impact on their business. Sure, Intel are reaching out to TSMC for chip production, but they also, Intel themselves, want to produce chips for others. And given what's happening in the marketplace right now, you know, it's basically been said that chip production is the new gold, right? It's the new oil. There is so much to say about this. It's going to be really interesting to see what actually comes of it and whether this purchase goes ahead. It could be, as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, easily one of the biggest and most impactful purchases in tech in a long time, and I'll be super curious to see how it all plays out. With that said, thank you very much for checking out the video. If you've enjoyed it, you know what to do, leave a like on the video, and I'll see you soon. Take care of yourselves. Bye for now.